is Dr. Holly Wright, a research projects manager at the Archaeological Data Service, responsible for the ADS's contribution to significant international research projects, including Ariadne Plus and CEDAR, which is Saving European Archaeology from the Digital Dark Ages. She's published on the subjects of digital archiving and large-scale online research infrastructures, and her previous background includes working as operations manager for the Minnesota Alliance for Arts in Education and as research manager at the University of York. And if you're happy to take it away, I will set you up on the PowerPoint. Yeah. You were... Can you just remind me which one it was? Ah, yes, the name's at the end, isn't it? There we go. And I will just make sure that's showing the right one. Oh, that's not what I want to click. Right, okay. Just make sure that's disappearing.
Right, thanks so much. And apologies I wasn't able to be here in the morning, but I've been able to glean a little bit of what I'm going to talk about. Actually was discussed a little bit in the morning, and that there is, I hope, a bit of a through line. And so this title is actually sort of the remit that Anwen gave me at the start. So I followed it up with not, because that's things have morphed a bit since then. I think it's what's still in the program, but I am going to touch on this, but I'm going to look at it from a very particular direction, which is I'm going to look at the different ways, the different sort of digital international ecosystems that these resources live in. And I'm going to look at it from the standpoint of data persistence, which is maybe a little bit different than what that says, but that's what I know about. I'm not an environmental archaeologist, so. So I think most people know what the Archaeology Data Service is, and that we are a domain-specific national digital archive for archaeological data. We obviously preserve data in the archive that I think a lot of you, it sounds like, have been using, which is wonderful. We wouldn't take anything that we wouldn't normally have make available freely online. But we also, as long as the archive has been around, we've been providing guidance and support for the people who are creating the data, many of you. But we also participate in national and international research, and that's my role within the organization. I manage the research side of what the ADS does. And this is our brand new website. I don't think anybody's seen it. We're very happy, finally. So this isn't meant to be an introduction to the ADS. What I want to do is sort of contextualize what I'm about to talk about. So I'll just talk about the way that I think about the ADS in terms of the ecosystem that we live in terms of the digital data that we hold. So we have the data that we archive ourselves, which is over nearly 3,000 data-rich project archives, so archives that represent some form of archaeological intervention. I think we're up to around 80,000, Tim says yes, around, that's still correct, 80,000 unpublished fieldwork reports. But what's really interesting that I don't think people sort of realize is in ARC search, which is this sort of overarching search mechanism that we have over 1.3 million metadata records so that you can search across our resources, but you can also search across metadata that's been aggregated from over 30 UK and regional historic environment inventories, some of which are much larger than we are. And some of which are incredibly small. So there's a whole range. So yes, we're an archive, we disseminate what we hold, but we act as an aggregator for other resources so that you can cross-search them all together. So what do we actually disseminate? You know, as I say, what we hold. We provide this integrated resource. But then in terms of where we sit in this ecosystem, we also aggregate our data out into even larger data ecosystems. So whenever you deposit your data with the Archaeology Data Service, it then becomes available, we then make it discoverable they're not taking the data, they're able to find the data, versus within these much larger aggregators. So for example, Europeana, and most certainly the Ariadne portal, which I don't know if people have encountered this or not. I will come back and say more about Ariadne in just a minute, but it's an example of something that is a large international aggregation infrastructure for archaeological data. So I don't pretend to know. I don't represent any of these, and nothing that I say is meant to be a criticism or an endorsement of any of these different digital environments. But what I thought I would do is just sort of contextualize when I look at these sorts of resources, what I see. So for example, Neotoma, which we were just talking about. So what I look at is what are they trying to do? What are they trying to, are they actually trying to ask people to contribute data? Is the data that people are contributing, what is the long-term trajectory of that data? What is the potential persistence of that data? Because I think we all know many projects we have that have had online resources. They might be around after 3 years after the project has ended, 5 years, maybe not so much. So what is happening is what I'd like to call the myth of persistence. So you put something out digitally online, and what you were saying about the need to preserve the physical archives is absolutely so important. And we have this sense that, oh, if we digitize it, we're done. We don't need to worry about either the physical archive, or we don't need to worry about the digital data that we've created, some of which is non-repeatable, into the future. Whereas essentially the opposite is true. Digital data is incredibly fragile. So I'm looking at this in terms of, well, what's the persistence here? What's the, if I contribute my data to this, where are the, how is it funded? Is it a project? Is it somebody's particular, something that they're just doing as part of their research that they're interested in? Where does it sit in this ecosystem? Is it collaborating with other types of data that's out there? And how long is it actually going to be around? And should I contribute my data to it or contribute my expertise to it? So moving to ZooArcNet, which I certainly know the people who are, even though I know nothing about environmental data or zooarchaeological data myself, I certainly know the people that are involved in this. And so I really trust, this is their mission statement, I really, I know them, I trust partly because I know that the person who is directing it works with open context, and I know open context, which I think was on one of the previous slides. They are not a Core Trust Seal accredited repository, the way that the Archaeology Data Service is, or indeed DANCE is the other sort of major holder of archaeological data that holds the Core Trust Seal. Historic Environment Scotland has just achieved it as well. But I know enough about them and their practices to know that the work that data is going to be pretty safe. I know what their workflows are. They're more, open context is more a publication platform, but their practices are very good, even though it's not a traditional archiving workflow. So I look at this and I think this is probably a pretty safe place for you to put your data in the long term, and it's probably going to continue to be available in this ecosystem for the long term. GBIF is a whole other level, obviously, as has been previously discussed. It is huge, it is international, it is persistent. Whether the actual, there's another thing, whether these really large sort of infrastructures, whether they're holding the metadata, which is the data that you use to find the data, which can be held lots of different places. You can have people pointing to your data, using the metadata lots of different ways, or the actual data, because if they're holding the actual data, then of course they have to be thinking about what is the long-term persistence for that data. But the thing that I think, when I look at GBEF, what I see is a community that is so advanced in terms of the way they're thinking about this. They're starting to set standards for the domain. And those standards are incredibly useful. So they're essentially doing things like coming up with controlled vocabularies and ways that you can use them that are machine actionable, things like that. So yeah, a whole other level with something as large as GBEF. I'm not picking on ISOBank, I'm not at all, but I just wanted to come up with an example of what I was saying about something that would worry me greatly when it comes to actually adding my data to it. So ISOBank, when you look at it, you find that it's a project. It was a time-limited project. It was trying to pull together isotope data, obviously, but nothing's been updated since the project ended in 2021. I don't think that anything probably is going to be done with the data, but and like I say, I don't know anything about the background. That's just what I see when I look at a resource like that. And my question is, what's going to happen with all of that data that the community, that isotope community contributed? So then I'll just come to seed only because this is a little bit different in that I know the people who've developed seed and have a kind of a better sense of what they're trying to accomplish, I guess, in terms of what they're, but at the same time, this is something that is very much tied to, you know, a particular researcher in a particular research lab wanting to make sure that this is available. Just if that researcher leaves and they're not able to do it anymore, what happens to all of this data? I know that he is working very hard to make sure that things are persistently available, but we all have to change jobs, circumstances change. So this would worry me just from the standpoint of this is driven by one person. I've already had a look at that, so I will skip that. So just to come back to Ariadne. The Ariadne infrastructure, we just finished the second 4-year development phase. So we've been working on this for a decade now, really. The most recent development phase, it was 41 partners in 28 countries. This time we already had the infrastructure pretty much built. So it was mostly about the archaeological partners, the data providing partners, trying to support them, support the people who wanted to make their data available via Ariadne. But we also were expanding thematic coverage to include things like environmental data and heritage science data, and that was part of what we were trying to do. So this is so basically I sent an email on Wednesday to our director to just ask, where are we in the aggregation process for the seed data? And he said, well, that's a really good question because it's in the staging portal right now. So this is a still of the seed data from UMIA in the Ariadne portal, and it may actually be in the live portal, which is at that URL right there. If it's not there by today, it will be there by next week. So it's in the Ariadne portal, and what that means is, so I just chose something that's actually in the seed, that was part of the seed, so I just filtered on the database that was provided by seed, and indeed there was something in Oxford. So I chose the record that was in Oxford, and what you can see is by providing their data, their metadata to Ariadne for aggregation, that seed data from UMIA about Oxford is now sitting alongside all of the other resources that we have for that ADS holds, that other organizations potentially hold, about Oxford, and you can see on the map that there are a lot of them. I won't go into the functionality of Ariadne, that's another talk. But you can just click through now and that takes you directly to the resource within the seed, So I guess the point is it's another way in. Everybody expressed positive and negative feelings about the different interfaces that they were just experimenting with. Whereas what we're trying to do is bring these things together so that you can search them in one place, in one way, and get to that data very directly. And we're really, really pleased that that data providers like SEED are wanting to have their data alongside all of the other 3 million resources that are in Ariadne, and hopefully that is just going to continue. And if anyone's interested in that, do let me know. That's it. Thank you.